Good evening. My name is Dave Jeffrey, and I am a planning and budgeting manager for Dollar General Corporation. Tonight, we'll be discussing Wellborn's procurement management process. So, first, I'd like to just discuss the project objective. So, basically, the objective was to review Wellborn's execution of the procurement process in regards to their ERP enterprise resource planning system. We analyzed the company's ability to plan procurement management, conduct, control, and close procurement, as well as communicate the procurement process. The main success criteria for this project was just identifying the best practices in order to replicate that for future projects. Moving on to slide 6, you can see that we have an overview of the project procurement management process, and this comes straight from the PMBOK. Next, we have the project procurement management summary, which comes from the SWAB text. Again, you see the same basic 4 processes, which include planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and then finally closing. Beginning on slide 8, we begin to break down the procurement process, beginning with the planned procurement management in regards to Wellborn. You can see we broke that down into inputs, tools and techniques, as well as outputs. I'd like to highlight a couple of these just to emphasize how Wellborn used these techniques. So in the input phase for the requirements documentation, they did have the product configuration requirements document, just stating the needs of the company. For the project schedule, they had the project reach realization schedule, which outlined the timeline for the project. Under tools and technique, similar to the make or buy analysis, Wellborn had to look at whether they were going to upgrade their current CMAX system or purchase a new system altogether. And then finally under outputs, you have the procurement documents, and in this case it consisted of the request for information and the request for proposal documents. Moving on to slide 9, we have conduct procurements. And for inputs, we have seller proposals, and this would consist of the demonstrations that the vendors conducted for Wellborn, demonstrating their products. Under tools and techniques, we have expert judgment, which would be the consultant selection that they used to assist with this process. And then analytical techniques, which would be something like the scorecards they use to rate their vendors. On the output side, we have selected sellers, and so for the software side they selected SAP, and on the hardware side they went with HP with an Oracle database. On slide 10, we discussed the control procurements. On the inputs, we have work performance reports, and so the example for Wellborn would be their SAP project review update. And then under tools and techniques, we have procurement performance reviews, and this would consist of the PMO project status update. And then the performance reporting, we have the REACH project summary status report. So these are basically just giving updates on the status of the procurement process. On slide 11, we have closed procurements, and so for one of the tools and techniques, we have procurement audits, and this would be the unit testings or integration testing to make sure that everything is performing as planned. We have the records management system, which would consist of the benefits realized table. So those were from the CIO and just documenting all the benefits from this project. And then you have the project timeline comparison, just discussing the different aspects of the project and how much time they took for each phase. On the output side, we have closed procurements, and this would just be the end of the project with the ERP implemented. So on slide 13, we just show the tools and techniques for the planned procurement management. And we had discussed these previously, but we have the make or buy analysis, expert judgment, market research, and meetings. And an example for the Wellborn project would be expert judgment, and in this case, Wellborn chose a consultant to assist with the ERP selection process. They wanted some professional experience that had gone through a similar process recently, and they were familiar with the other vendors and the products that they offered. And at the end, they selected IBM as their partner for this selection process. Continuing on slide 15, we just discusses how they wanted to select more than just a company. They wanted to look at the individual consultants that would be working on this project, and so they took the time to review the resumes of these individuals, and basically they were looking for somebody who would be unbiased and would help them to weigh the pros and cons of each vendor, and then they also were looking for someone that had experience doing similar projects. Moving on to the conducting procurements tools and techniques on slide 17. We just list them out there. We have the bidder conferences, independent estimates, advertising, to name a few. So for Wellborn, we looked at the analytical techniques, and basically Wellborn developed detailed requirements definitions for each functional area, and this served as a guide for selecting the vendor. They developed a RFI outlining all their requirements, assessed each company's strengths, weaknesses, looked at the costs. In the end, they invited 4 companies, Friedman, JD Edwards, Oracle, and SAP, to come and demonstrate their products. They developed a scorecard in order to rate the performance of each of these candidates. And they were also let the candidates know where they scored weak and allowed them the opportunity to provide additional information. On slide 19, you have the product configuration requirements that were provided to the vendors. On slide 20, we have a list of the potential vendors from the beginning. And on slide 21, we have an example of the 4 scorecards for the 4 vendors that Wellborn brought in. And you can see that it's broken down into the strengths, weaknesses, and then the focus areas. Moving on to slide 23, we have the control procurements, their tools and techniques here. And so to list a few, we have inspections and audits, payment systems, and record management system. So we looked at the procurement performance reviews, and this would consist of the management team sign off and scope creep. And so basically Wellborn wanted a test of the overview of the system, wanted to make sure that it was operating to the standards of the company. They went through and recapped all the requirements and reviewed that with the vendor to make sure SAP had met all their requirements. And then they did have a little bit of a scope creep, which would ultimately increase the cost of the project. Slide 25 just outlines the business blueprint phase and just goes through some of the different processes that are involved with making sure that this project is on schedule and meets the scope. So with the closing procurements, going down to slide 27, this is basically the process of completing the procurement, and it's definitely beneficial as far as documenting this for future reference. So the three tools and techniques are procurement audits, procurement negotiations, and records management system. So the successful ERP implementation at Wellborn really was a testament to the system that they used. This formal process, was more expensive up front, but that paid dividends down the road because they got the product that they wanted. And the CAO, Gerald Wiley, he documents some of the benefits of the project on the next slide. And this is slide 30. It just shows some of the benefits, what was the state of the system beforehand and what's the state afterwards. On slide 31, we have the timeline, just looking at the different phases of the project and how much time they spent on each phase. As far as communication of the procurement process, I looked at it from two aspects. First, internally, so as far as talking to the departments, Wellborn was able to gather feedback from their employees. There were parts of this old system that they did like, but there was other parts that were still very unuser-friendly. Externally, they talked to the various vendors, how we discussed earlier, gathered feedback, and gave the vendors feedback on exactly what they wanted and provided clarification for any questions they may have had. Slide 34 has the request for information example. Also looked at some of the strengths and weaknesses. So, they did a great job of communicating with the vendors, clearly laid out their expectations. Some of the weaknesses, they could have improved them. The communication within the organization. Many did like the legacy system, but they were also resistant to change. As far as recommendations go, definitely showing the benefits and potential of the new system may be helpful as far as gaining support from within the organization, and then just discussing additional opportunities created for the future that the new ERP system provides. At this time, are there any questions? Well, thank you very much and have a good evening.